Welcome back, and today I'm going to talk about a project that I did 5 years ago. I probably should have done a video on it before now, but I just didn't get around to it, so I'm going to talk about it now. To become a bobtail, my Discovery had to be chopped down, and that took away the space the fuel tank would have sat in. Even if a smaller one could have been squeezed in there, the rear winch went in there and took up that space. So the builder of mine decided to put it inside behind the driver's seat, which is a pretty unusual location. It's a very unusual shape, and so the fuel tank had to be very custom and very unique. The original reason I took the tank out was to replace the sight tube that was on the side that showed the level of fuel. When it was new and fresh you could see quite well, but after this amount of time it had gone brown and dirty and you just couldn't see anything. So I wanted to put some kind of fuel gauge in there that actually gave me a proper reading. While I had it out, it seemed like a good idea to give it a bit of a restoration. I decided to just sand back the paint that was there to create a key, but it became obvious really quickly that some areas had rust as I was starting to go through the paint. You can see here all these areas that are showing bare metal are all areas where there were rust on both sides. Through the black paint, through the primer and to metal. I had to take it all the way back. Fortunately, there were no pinholes. You can see on this side the inlet and outlet hoses, the vent and the filler neck. When I removed the tank, I also found the last piece of remaining blue carpet from the original Discovery. This is the carpet it would have had all the way through, and this is the last bit that remained, which unfortunately, as you can see, had to be thrown away. Once I was satisfied that all the rust was gone, I could fog the thing with anti-rust primer in all the areas where I had gone down to bare metal. As you can see, I've removed the sight tube here and blocked up all the holes so that nothing gets inside. This was just the first fog, but I went through to cover the bare metal completely in anti-rust primer. The top coat may be a bit of an unusual one, but I went with bed liner paint because it's got a nice textured finish and it's very tough. This was the first coat, and then it was followed up by a second coat once it was in the garage. It is nice tough paint, it's stuff that I've used on the floor as well. I had a rough idea of where I wanted to put the fuel gauge, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't hit anything once I put it inside. So I've rigged up this little thing with a selfie stick, a camera and bits of wire, and I stuck it inside the tank through the filler neck. As you can see, there's a baffle there, but not much else, and certainly in the location I wanted to use, there was nothing to hit. While the tank was out, it gave me an opportunity to clean up the area it sat in, because I hadn't even seen it before. Here I've gone through with seam sealer and covered up all the little edges that maybe had a little bit of rust, and then I've gone through and painted the whole thing black. So here you can see that sight tube again. Piece of dirty pipe that you're supposed to be able to read the fuel level through, but really you couldn't. I decided to replace it with a marine fuel gauge which has a float, a spiral shaft, a little needle at the top and then the gauge around it. To install it, I first had to mark the hole locations for the large hole and then all the bolt holes, and then drill those out, using a bit of tape underneath to make sure nothing fell in. With the holes drilled, the top collar of the fuel gauge needed to be bolted on. The bolts would be dropped through from the top, but then I needed to find a way to put the nuts on underneath. Luckily I have a 3D printer, so I came up with this little strange shaped device which will hold the nuts and allow me to put them through the hole and hold them in position while I put the bolts through. It works surprisingly well, and as you can see, all of the bolts are in place. The fuel gauge then just screws on, and that's job done. Finally, the tank could go back in place. It does fit quite snugly. It's a fun job trying to get it in. And then the wire mesh shelf could go back above it. I did eventually cut out a piece of the wire mesh so that you could see the gauge more clearly, but you still have to fold the seat forward. One time I folded the seat forward to check the fuel, and then folded the seat back with my head still in place. Yeah, I broke my glasses. Well, that's a few weeks condensed down into not much time. It did take a little while for this project to be completed, but it was worth it because now I really know how much fuel's in there. I have contemplated getting an electric version of this to connect it to the real fuel gauge, but it really isn't much effort to actually look behind the seat, and I don't use this vehicle very much, so I just top it up when it gets to around a quarter. I can't imagine anybody else out there will be doing a similar project, but if you were, I hope this was useful, and it's another piece to the history of my Bobtail. Thanks for watching.